Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Doxa Sub 200. This watch is available from doxawatches.com for $1,090, which is €1,045. Doxa have a rich brand heritage. They were founded in Switzerland in 1889. In the 1960s, they produced a model called the Shark Hunter, reference 11804-4. The Shark Hunter had twisted lyre lugs, rather like the Omega Seamaster, and also like this Sub 200. So one could consider this Sub 200 to be a heritage reissue of the Shark Hunter from the 1960s, made to modern day specifications. So firstly, let's look at the hard shell travel case that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the specifications of the piece. So the watch comes in this hard shell travel case. I'll show you the interior. The interior is fully upholstered with a blue velour fabric to a good standard, and in the base there's a hard panel you can remove. The hard panel is fully upholstered with nylon sailcloth weave fabric, both on the front and the reverse. And on the reverse, we also have a contrasting orange fish, which is the Doxa emblem. There's also a piece of foam which is profiled, and that is for the shape of the bracelet. Now, this is okay, but bearing in mind we're looking at a mid-tier piece costing €1,045. It is a disappointment. Hard shell travel cases are acceptable for low-tier pieces costing below €500. But when one gets to the mid-tier, at the €1,045 price point, one expects better quality presentation. For example, a genuine leather travel roll, or alternatively a solid wood or plastic watch box which is vinyl coated with PU leather or vinyl. So I think that they could do better, and I think this is disappointing. So with regards to the specifications of the piece, we have a 42mm case diameter. We have a lug-to-lug measurement of 46mm, a thickness of 14mm, and a lug width of 19mm. Now, the thing to note is the lug width is an odd 19mm, but the bracelet is straight and parallel. It does not taper. It's 20mm at the lugs and 20mm at the flip-lock clasp. I think they've made a mistake here. They should have used the industry standard taper, which is 20mm to 16 at the clasp. The other mistake they've made is not using the contemporary 20mm lug width for the bracelet. 19mm was popular in the 1960s and 1970s, and of course one could consider this to be a heritage reissue of the Shark Hunter, but this is now 2025. 18, 20 and 22 respectively are now the industry standards. 19mm is an odd size. The problem with it is, if you want to exchange this beads of rice bracelet and fit it on a strap, the 19mm lug width does limit your options. If it were 20, there are a plethora of strap and bracelet options. So this bracelet does add significant heft to the piece because it is 161 grams despite having a very light gauge flip-lock clasp. So the watch is covered by a 2-year international warranty, which is very good. We have a double dome sapphire crystal with a box top hat profile to it. This does add significant thickness to it, but it is very aesthetically pleasing. It does look like the acrylic crystal used in the 1960s on the Shark Hunter, but of course sapphire crystal is more hard and scratch resistant, so it is modern day specification of a vintage looking piece. One does get some slight distortion and slight magnification effect when you tilt the piece at an oblique angle, as per an acrylic crystal from the 1960s, but it is curved on the underside rather than being flat as per a single dome crystal, so therefore one doesn't get so much distortion and magnification. The dial has the classic Shark Hunter dial layout with applied indices, which are symmetrical, and of course the baton hands are also similar to the Shark Hunter from the 1960s. I like the symmetry of the dial, but of course we have the absence of the index at 3 o'clock because of the framed date complication. The orange tone is iconic classic Doxa, and I like that the dial isn't over-branded with unnecessary text or specification, just the right amount of information, because we have the Doxa text logo at 12 and simply sub 200 at 6 o'clock. Either side of the 6 o'clock index we have Swiss made, so just the right amount of information. The bezel insert is made from sapphire crystal, and it's fully lumed with orange superluminova, which we'll test in the lume test. The bezel itself is solid 316L grade stainless steel, concentric CNC lathe tool machined to the undercut which is brushed satin finished. And then we've also got a gear tooth profile to the tops of the bezel. Now, it's been chamfered and deburred very well, so the tips of the gear tooth teeth on the bezel aren't sharp, although they are very grippy and tactile, and it does give the vintage aesthetic. For example, it does look similar to a Shark Hunter bezel used in the 1960s. The Shark Hunter from the 1960s used an aluminium bezel insert rather than Bakelite, but this sapphire crystal bezel insert does look like a 1960s or 1970s Bakelite bezel, so it does give the piece a vintage aesthetic. Let's test the bezel execution. 120 click unidirectional bezel, as one would expect. Medium resistance, it doesn't feel too heavy or too light. It feels even all the way through the 360 degrees. Nice, loud, audible clicks. No lateral side-side play whatsoever. No back play whatsoever. So although it's medium resistance rather than firm, it does feel nice and tight and robust. So let's check the alignment. One more click. Perfect. The Lume's triangle, which is inlaid into the sapphire bezel insert, perfectly aligns with the 12 o'clock index and the 60-minute tick on the chapter ring. So this is an example to other mid-tier brands of how to get bezel execution correct. Medium firm resistance, feels even all the way through the 360 degrees, no lateral side-side play, no back play, perfect alignment. This is 10 out of 10. Nice, loud, audible clicks. So let's test the screw down crown execution. Solid 316L grade stainless steel crown, coin edge finished. Nice chamfer to the tips of the coin edge teeth, so it doesn't feel sharp, but it does feel grippy and tactile. It's partially recessed into the right hand flank of the case, but it does project enough to get good purchase with one's index finger and thumb. So let's test unscrewing it. Silky smooth. This is sublime screw down crown execution. The screw down crown provides an effective hermetic seal to 200 meters. So when it's unscrewed, we're now in the manual wind position, so one can manually wind the Sellita caliber SW200-1 to its maximum 41-hour power reserve. Feels nice and firm, smooth to manually wind, and one can feel the tension gradually building up, so it feels pleasant to manually wind. It doesn't feel rough or gritty, and I like it. Putting it out to the first click position is the quick set date complication. So if you look at the framed date window at 3 o'clock, you can see when you rotate the crown clockwise, it advances the quick set date. Nice light indexing, but they do click over with a nice positive click. So I like the satisfying clicking feeling, and it feels light. You have to get accustomed to it, but it does feel very good to set the date. The alignment is correct. Both the single and the double Arabic numerals aren't too far to the left or right, and they're not too high or low in the date window, and the proportion, the size of the date window is good. It doesn't create a shadow around the date complication. White date tool with black Arabic numerals contrasts very well, and there's a nice fine font. It looks crisp and high definition. The Arabic numerals aren't too thick and blurry. They're nice and sharp and crisp, so the legibility of both the singles and the doubles is very good, as well as the alignment. Pulling it out to the second click position hacks the movement, and if you look at the second hand, you can see it's now stopped dead, so it's possible to set the time precisely to the second with a caliber SW200-1 automatic. So we're now in the time setting position. Light resistance to the gearing, it feels smooth, clockwise and anti-clockwise, cycling through the 12 hours. Now there is some slight back play, and that's a characteristic of the SW200-1 you just have to become accustomed to, but once you become accustomed to taking up the slack, it does feel very pleasant. So as you can see, when I rotate the crown clockwise and anti-clockwise, the minute hand doesn't immediately respond. You have to take up the slight slack, but it is minimal and it is acceptable, and once you get used to it, it's a pleasure to set the time. Pushing it back in's got a nice positive click, and that restarts the second hand. I like the baton hands, but I also like the rectangle pip on the second hand. It does give the piece a nice vintage aesthetic as per the Shark Hunter from the 1960s. So let's test screwing it back down. Instant thread pickup. There's a perfect interface between the internal thread of the stainless steel crown and the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. There are two rubber O-ring gaskets, one inside the stainless steel crown and a second rubber O-ring gasket inside the stainless steel crown tube, and the two hermetic seals provide a hermetic seal to 200 meters, which is good specification. So the screw down crown is silky smooth, and it's an example to other mid-tier brands at the €1,045 price point of how to get it correct. So let's look at the bracelet and then links in detail. So beads of rice bracelet, 20mm at the lugs, 20 at the flip lock clasp. I think it would look better if it were 20 to 16. The other thing is it adds significant meat to the piece because this is a heavy 161 grams. So really it's 11 grams too heavy because this bracelet does not taper. It could be reduced by 11 grams to the sweet spot of 150 grams if they made the taper 20 to 16. So as I've detailed, it's got an odd lug width of 19 millimeters, but on a positive note, it articulates freely. It doesn't feel stiff or kink. But however, there's a negative I want you to be aware of. Look at the amount of play. Lateral, longitudinal, side to side, up and down play. Play in every single direction. So of course, because there's so much play, it articulates freely, but it's sloppy. And this is significant play. We're not talking about minimal or slight play. Look how much that wobbles. This is simply down to poor tolerances. The pin going through the end link in the bracelet, the beads of rice section, is undersized and the holes are too large, and what you get is this wobble. Lateral, side to side, up and down, play in every single direction. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, articulates freely because of course it's sloppy. The holes are too large and the pin is undersized, and again we have the same problem. Lateral, side to side, up and down, longitudinal play. Play in every single direction. The problem is it rattles. It makes an annoying clicking sound when on wrist. Both the 6 o'clock side and the 12 o'clock side have the same sloppy fit. This is wholly unacceptable. We're not looking at a low tier piece below €500 here. We're looking at a mid tier piece costing €1,045. This kind of poor build quality, quality control and tolerances is wholly unacceptable. Now, with regards to the bracelet, on a positive note, the mirror polishing to the beads of rice links is done to perfection. The brush satin finishing to the outer links is also done to perfection. Beautiful luster to the longitudinal brush satin finishing. So visually, from an aesthetic perspective, it does look like a beautiful bracelet. Of course, it does articulate freely, no stiff links, which is a positive. The negative is, it's a screw link bracelet rather than push pins, and one would expect it to be nice and tight, but it rattles. Every single one of the screw pin links in the beads of rice bracelet have excessive play. Longitudinal, lateral, side to side, up and down play. And the cumulative effect across the length of the bracelet is it rattles on wrist. Now let's check the other side for continuity. Again, articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff, doesn't kink, because of course there is excess play, it's a sloppy bracelet. Every single one of the screw pin links rattle. This is simply down to poor tolerances. The holes are too large and the screw pins are undersized because what you have is too much play. And it's significant play. This is the kind of excess play, the kind of sloppy bracelet one would expect with a low tier piece below €500, not a mid tier piece costing €1,045. It is wholly unacceptable. So it rattles on wrist. Now that's not the only negative, unfortunately. Let's look at the flip lock clasp in detail. So, flip lock clasp is signed in two places. We've got the Doxa text logo embossed on the flip lock itself, and then on the body we've got a mirror polished embossed Doxa fish emblem. Brush satin finish to the body, which has a beautiful luster, and on the flanks that contrasts with the flawless mirror polishing. 4 micro adjustments really is the minimum for a dive piece. I would like to see 5 or 6 holes drilled in the flanks to better allow for fine tuning the length. Now on a positive note, we do have half links in the beads of rice bracelet. 1 half link on the 6 o'clock side, 1 half link on the 12 o'clock side respectively. This is good because with beads of rice bracelets with full links, often it's the case if you add or subtract 1 full link, you cannot get the correct fit. The bracelet either feels slightly too tight or too loose, but by having a half link either side of the clasp, you can fine tune the length. In the absence of a micro adjustment clasp, half links are beneficial. The other benefit is you can get the alignment of the clasp correct, because often when you add or subtract 1 full link, it makes the clasp off centre. It sits too far to the 6 or too far to the 12 o'clock side, so it doesn't feel comfortable to wear. But by having a half link, you can adjust the alignment. You can get the clasp bang on the centre of the wrist so it fits symmetrically, which is good. But this is a very light gauge of 316L grade stainless steel. It's a pressed clasp, as you can see. Very light gauge, the kind of flip lock clasp one would expect on a low tier piece below €500. Again, this is wholly unacceptable for a mid-tier piece, costing €1,045. It is a very disappointing cost-cutting measure. Doxa have clearly used this light gauge of pressed metal in order to cut production costs and to maximise profit margin per piece. This is a cost-cutting measure too far. So let's look at the interior. Solid mill 316L grade stainless steel, as one would expect. Longitudinal brushed satin finishing to the top side, underside and flanks. No sharp edges to the flanks, which is good. Doesn't have sharp corners to the centre section, so that's good. Let's check the hinge pins. Left hand hinge pin unfortunately has excessive play. Lateral, longitudinal, side to side, up and down play. Play in every single direction. Again, this is poor quality, build quality, quality control and tolerances. The holes are drilled too large. The pin going through them is undersized, and then what you have is a sloppy fit rather than an interference fit. Now, of course, needless to say, it articulates freely because there's excessive play, so it doesn't feel stiff or kink, but too much play, and it clicks and makes a rattling noise, which is irritating. Let's check the centre hinge pin. I'm just going to put my glove behind it and you'll see it better with the camera focused. Again, significant lateral, side to side, up and down, longitudinal play. Play in every single direction. It's sloppy. My concern with this is long-term durability. The pin is riveted at either end, but the problem with the rivets is the riveted end of the pin. It's in an elongated hole, which is too large. How long is it going to be with regular wear? For example, you're going to be opening and closing this on a daily basis. The excessive play means the pin is put under excessive shear load. How long is it going to be before the pin breaks because of the shear load? Alternatively, the rivet end of the pin wears off in the elongated hole and then the pin falls out, the bracelet comes open and the piece falls on the ground. This is the problem. Not only does it rattle and make a clicking sound, also it places excessive shear load on the pin because it's sloppy. Finally, let's check the right hand hinge pin. Again, this is an absolute disgrace. Lateral, longitudinal, side to side, up and down play. One could be magnanimous about this kind of poor build quality, quality control, tolerances on a low tier piece below €500. This is a mid tier piece at €1,045. Wholly unacceptable. This is a disgrace to Doxa. Just look at the amount of play. It's the kind of play one would expect with a low tier piece below €100, not 1,045. An absolute disgrace. Dreadful. Now the cumulative effect is the left hand, centre and right hand hinge pins all have play. Cumulatively, that means the solid mill clasp rattles. It's sloppy and it makes a clicking sound. Dreadful. So let's look at the diver's extension. Unfortunately, the disappointment doesn't end there. Again, this is the kind of pressed stainless steel diver's extension one would expect on a low tier piece costing below €100. It is wholly unacceptable. They haven't even mirror polished it. It's left unfinished. This is just a matte finish which comes from die casting and pressing. Now it's deburred in chamfered well, there's no sharp edges to it, but it's very light gauge as you can see. The minimum it should be with a diver's extension link should be rather like a Rolex EasyLink extension made from solid milled 316L grade stainless steel, not pressed stainless steel which is unfinished. This is not mirror polished. They haven't even brushed satin finished it. It's a disgrace. Now it does click in with a nice positive click and it does deploy with a nice positive click, so it works okay. But again, needless to say, look at the amount of play we've got in the pin. Longitudinal, lateral, side to side, up and down play. Let's check the pin going into the end link in the bracelet. Again, longitudinal, lateral, side to side, up and down play. Play in every single direction. So when you deploy this, for example, if you're going to use this as a dive piece and wear it around a wetsuit, which is the intended purpose of the diver's extension link, look at the amount of play. It rattles. Again, my concern is long-term durability. How long is it going to be before this spring bar inside fails due to the sloppy play? How long is it going to be before the pin, which is riveted at either end, is going to fail due to the excessive play in the elongated hole? This is absolutely dreadful and wholly unacceptable in the mid-tier at €1,045. It should be a solid milled stainless steel diver's extension, and of course it could be better enhanced if it had a micro adjustment clasp, which has now become the industry standard in 2025. These kind of pressed light gauge stainless steel flip lock clasps and pressed stainless steel diver's extensions are completely outdated. They were acceptable in the early 2000s, but not in 2025. Doxa really need to update this. So really disappointing bracelet and really disappointing diver's extension link. So let's look at the screw down case back. Solid 316L grade stainless steel. Mirror polished throughout. The milled slots are deburred and chamfered very well, so no sharp edges. The centre section is engraved with a Doxa fish emblem to a good standard. The engraving is very well polished. It doesn't feel sharp, so it doesn't scratch and irritate the wrist. And the circumference is engraved with a specification. The engraving is high definition and it's polished, so no sharp edges to the engraving. It's sharp and crisp. So concentric CNC lathe tool machining to the centre, and the circumference is mirror polished. It does have a bubble back profile to it, which does add some thickness to the piece, and it's already thick because of the tall boxed top hat profile to the double dome sapphire crystal. This is 14mm. They could slim down this case back. Yes, this is an automatic. It's powered by the SW200-1, so it does have a rotor and therefore it needs adequate clearance, but they could make the case back thinner and flatter. This is not 300 meters water resistant, it's only 200, so they could use a much flatter profile to the case back and reduce the thickness of the piece from 14 down to 13, simply by using a thinner, flatter case back. Yes, it does provide 200 meters, but one would expect a thinner case back rather than a thick bubble back case back. This looks rather like a 300 meter case back, which is thicker and also bubble back profiled. So the case back is too thick, the profile is incorrect. On a positive note, the end links are a good snug fit to the head of the piece, and the underside to the head of the piece is mirror polished to a flawless standard, and the undercuts to the flanks are deburred and chamfered very well. The tips of the lugs are also polished and deburred very well, so no sharp corners to the case, doesn't have sharp edges to the undercuts to the flanks, so that's good. Right, so I'll give you a wrist shot and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now, I haven't sized the bracelet, and I'm pleased to report I can easily slide 2 fingers underneath the bracelet and clasp at all times, so that indicates that the bracelet, with all the links in it, will fit up to a maximum 9-inch wrist. There are enough removable links to size this down to fit a 6-inch wrist, so this will fit from a 6 up to a 9 with all the links in the bracelet. But, as I've detailed, they've made a fundamental error because it does not taper. It's 20 and 20. This would look far more aesthetically pleasing, and it would also feel better balanced. The comfort level and feel good factor would be enhanced if it had the industry standard 20 to 16 taper. The problem is there's far too much meat on the bracelet and it doesn't feel like a balanced piece. The bracelet feels too heavy for the head of the piece. 42mm does give wrist presence, as one would expect, but it would look far more aesthetically pleasing if it had a 20 to 16 taper, because this straight bracelet really doesn't look right on the 42mm case. And bear in mind, it does have Omega Seamaster case shape to it, or alternatively the Doxa Sharkmaster from the 1960s with the twisted lyre lugs. They are very aesthetically pleasing, but then they're spoiled by having a straight parallel bracelet rather like an Omega Seamaster. It just doesn't look right. A tapered bracelet would look far much better. Now, on a positive note, the shape of the case with the lyre lugs does fit very well. Nice curved undercuts means it's a snug fit to the wrist despite the bubble back profile to the thick case back. The lyre lugs, which are like an Omega Seamaster, are very aesthetically pleasing. The box top hat profile to the double dome sapphire crystal is also very aesthetically pleasing because it gives the piece a vintage aesthetic, rather like an acrylic crystal, and I do like it. I also like the sapphire bezel insert because it has a nice glossy finish as per a Bakelite bezel used in the 1960s and 1970s. So the head of the piece is very aesthetically pleasing. On a positive note, the mirror polished centre links in the beads of rice bracelet do catch the light and look very aesthetically pleasing, and there is a beautiful lustre to the outer links of the beads of rice bracelet, although the end links don't articulate very well. As you can see, as per female pivoted end links, you do still get a gap beneath the tips of the lugs and the end link in the bracelet. So I think there's room for refinement with regards to the end links and also, as I've detailed, the taper on the bracelet. 19mm really does spoil this piece. It would look so much better if it had a 20mm lug width, slightly wider lug width, and that would make, aesthetically, the lyre lugs look thinner in between the lugs, and then 20 to 16 of course would look better than this abhorrent straight parallel bracelet with this dreadful light gauge pressed flip lock clasp with the pressed stainless steel extension link. It's a dreadful clasp, dreadful bracelet. So, good looking piece. Comfort level is poor. Feel good factor is good. It looks good, but it just doesn't feel good because it's too heavy. 161 grams, it's 11 grams above the sweet spot. Now, of course, it does have a very long bracelet, but even if you remove 5 or 6 links from the bracelet to fit a 7 or 8 inch wrist, it still has too much meat on the bracelet. I always refer to this in my previous reviews. 150 grams is the sweet spot for comfort, to wear a piece for long periods of time. At 161, this is 11 grams too heavy to be comfortable to wear for long periods of time. They could simply reduce 11 grams from this piece by tapering the bracelet. Fundamental error. So let's do a Lume test and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. Right, so as you can see, this is disappointing. Now, why is it disappointing? Clearly, we've got C3 Superluminova on the applied indices and the handset, which is performing well because we have 5 to 6 layers, which is optimum. It is the industry standard. So they haven't used the cost-cutting measure of 3 to 4 layers, which is good. Why do I say it's disappointing? Well, if you look at this, the sapphire bezel insert, it's fully lumed with orange Superluminova, which contrasts. The problem is, we're not looking at 5 to 6 layers. It's going to become apparent shortly why this is a negative. They've applied 2 to 3 or possibly 3 to 4, but definitely not 5 to 6 layers to the sapphire bezel inserts because it's beginning to fade and fade fast, and as time goes on it will fade exponentially and it will fade rapidly to nothing. This is a very disappointing fully lumed sapphire bezel insert. If you look at the Arabic numerals, you can see already the legibility is fading fast. It's going to become difficult to read the Arabic numerals on the sapphire bezel inserts. They're fading very quickly. And if you look at the hour markers on the bezel insert or the minute marks, you can see they're also beginning to fade fast. So the orange Superluminova they're using in the sapphire bezel insert or beneath it is fading rapidly. Now compare that to the exciter in the C3 Superluminova on the indices and the hands. Much brighter performance. Perfect colour tone match. Green on the indices, green on the handset, and the proportion of the baton hands is good. They allow for a large plot, a large area of C3 Superluminova to be applied. So the quality on the dial and the hands is good. It's 5 to 6 layers as one would expect. The exciter is performing well. But now look at the sapphire bezel insert. The orange Superluminova is now quickly fading, and as time goes on, it will rapidly fade to nothing. This is dreadful. Again, we're not looking at a low-tier piece below €500. One could be magnanimous about a poor quality fully lumed sapphire bezel insert below €500 in the low tier. We're looking at a mid-tier piece costing €1,045. This is absolutely dreadful fully lumed sapphire bezel insert performance at this price point. It's one of the worst performing fully lumed bezels I have seen on my channel. Just look at it now. Fading to nothing. Now the dial and the hands are still performing okay, so that's acceptable. 5 to 6 layers, that's what you get. But you can clearly see the difference. With the sapphire bezel inserts, this is clearly 2 to 3 or a maximum of 3 to 4 layers. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, it's 3 to 4. It's now fading to nothing. This is meant to be a dive piece. You can look underwater and read the bezel, or alternatively in the dark you're supposed to be able to read the bezel. That's the purpose of a rotating bezel. You can now see after only a short amount of time, under 5 minutes, the bezel is worthless. So €1,045, this is the best Doxa can do. Absolutely dreadful. It's a disgrace to Doxa. Right, so let's discuss the movement use because it's one of my favourite aspects of the piece. You'll all be familiar with this Sellita Caliber SW200-1 automatic, which is Swiss made. It has 26 joules and it runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. It has hand winding and hacking, which is useful complications, and a quick set date complication, which as I've demonstrated works well. 41-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable. The stated accuracy of the Caliber SW200-1 is plus or minus 12 to plus or minus 30 seconds per day. So a rather wide accuracy range. However, I'm pleased to report that Doxa are doing a good job of well regulating the Caliber SW200-1s they're using. This one is running consistently at plus 6 seconds per day when it's fully wound to its maximum 41-hour power reserve. Plus 6 is within chronometer grade accuracy of minus 4 to plus 6 and certainly within the stated accuracy of plus or minus 12 to plus or minus 30 seconds per day. So they're clearly regulating their movements in 5 positions to attain chronometer accuracy of plus 6. No negatives to the SW200-1. It's reliable, well-proven workhorse Swiss caliber. Hand winding works well, hacking works well, quickset decomplication works well, as I've demonstrated. Feels smooth to manually wind. I like everything about it. It is the correct choice of movement at this price point in the mid-tier, €1,045. The SW200-1 is well proven, reliable and accurate. So last I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet two criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So, mid-tier piece, the price point is $1,090, which is €1,045. I'm going to declare it poor quality and poor value at €1,045. The bracelet and end links on this piece are a disgrace. They're absolutely dreadful. Rattles. The hinge pins, as I've detailed, have excessive play, a disgrace. The pressed metal diver's extension link is a disgrace. What we're looking at here is cost-cutting measure after cost-cutting measure, and they're a step too far with regards to maximising profit margin per piece. At €1,045, one cannot be magnanimous about these kind of shortcomings. And unfortunately, that's not the only negative. As I've showed you, the Lume test. The sapphire bezel insert, which is lumed with orange superluminova, performs dreadfully. It's an absolute disgrace to Doxa. So those reasons alone make it poor quality and poor value. Bracelet, end links, hinge pins in the clasp, diver's extension link, cost-cutting measure after cost-cutting measure, and then we've also got the cost-cutting measure of 2 to 3 or a maximum of 3 to 4 layers of superluminova on the sapphire bezel insert. What we're looking at here is too many cost-cutting measures at €1,045. As I've detailed, one could be magnanimous about this kind of cost-cutting with a low-tier piece costing below €500. This is a mid-tier piece costing €1,045. It is expensive. So we can't even say that it is a good or excellent quality and value head of the piece due to the bezel insert being poor performing. And of course, the bracelet is dreadful. So I can't recommend this piece to you for your consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Doxa Sub 200. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.